Welcome to the Graduated Thoughts Podcast.
Usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this inherent expectation of precision. It feels like engineering.
Yeah, exactly. It's binary. Like it's either broken or it's not broken. It's clean and visible.
Right. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor points at the screen and says, well, there it is.
Right. It's all categorized.
But then you step into the world of historical medicine, specifically the medical landscape of enslaved people in the American South. And that x-ray machine just shatters.
Oh, completely. It's a totally different reality.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape built entirely on, well, shadows, whispers, and survival against just mathematically impossible odds. It completely breaks our modern understanding of what it means to heal.
It really does. It forces you to reevaluate everything.
And before we jump into the text today, because we are unpacking historically and socially charged topics like the brutal realities of American slavery, structural racism, and medical history, it's important to establish our framework for this deep dive.
Yeah, setting the tone here is crucial.
Right. So our role here is to impartially report on the arguments and historical narratives presented in these texts.
Right.
We aren't here to endorse specific viewpoints or editorialize, but just to help you navigate and understand the intense landscape of these sources.
And we really want to emphasize to you, the listener, that the goal today is absolutely not to romanticize suffering.
No, not at all.
Because, frankly, the institution of slavery offers no silver linings. Rather, our focus is on the incredible human ingenuity, the intricate care networks, and the cultural survival that somehow flourished in those dark circumstances.
Exactly. And to do that, we have this monumental stack of sources on the table today. We're looking at Herbert C. Covey's African-American Slave Medicine, Stephanie Y. Mitchum's African-American Folk Healing, Katrina Hesser-Donnell's Mojo Workin', and Starkuss's The Conjure Workbook.
It's a lot of material, and these are deeply anthropological explorations of a culture that was, legally forbidden to protect itself.
Right, which means they had to invent their own shadow medical system right under the noses of their oppressors.
Which is just astonishing when you think about the logistics of it.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really understand how profound that is, we have to start by looking at what they were up against. Right. Let's look at the baseline.
The baseline being the institutional care provided by the enslaver.
Exactly. Institutional white medical care for enslaved people wasn't just inadequate, it was actively dangerous.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is the core tension stems from the legal classification of human beings as property. It created this horrifying paradox.
A paradox how?
Well, enslavers had an economic incentive to keep their property alive so they could continue to extract labor, right? But they fundamentally refused to see enslaved people as human beings deserving of compassionate care.
Oh, wow. So medical intervention wasn't about care at all.
Not at all. It was rarely about alleviating suffering. It was entirely about protecting an investment.
And Herbert Covey's research points out some chilling realities about what that care actually looked like. In the 19th century, institutional medicine was dominated by something called heroic medicine.
Right, heroic medicine, which is a term that sounds noble until you realize what it actually entails.
Yeah, the details are rough.
Heroic medicine was based on the premise that the body's humors were out of balance. So the doctor had to provoke a violent physical reaction to, force the sickness out.
Right, and one of the primary tools for this was the blue mass pill. We found oral histories from ex-slaves recalling plantation mistresses forcing these pills on them.
And do you know what was in those pills?
Hold up, yeah, I had to look into what was actually in a blue mass pill. It was essentially a ball of mercury.
Wait, literal mercury?
Literal mercury. It was mercury chloride, specifically calomel, mixed with licorice root or honey to make it palatable.
Oh my God, and doctors were feeding massive, unregulated doses of heavy metals to enslaved people just to cure a basic fever.
They were, and the results were horrific.
I mean, mercury causes violent dysentery, extreme salivation, vomiting.
Yeah, sometimes a patient's teeth would literally fall out from the heavy metal poisoning.
But to the plantation doctor practicing heroic medicine, this severe purging was seen as proof that the medicine was working, like the sickness was supposedly being evacuated.
There is a quote from one of the historical narratives that will honestly haunt me. An ex-slave describing these treatments said, "We had to get sick to get well."
That is just, it's devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And when you combine the toxic reality of 19th century white medicine with the absolute lack of bodily autonomy, The psychological toll is staggering.
It's the literal colonization of black bodies.
Exactly. When your physical form is not legally your own, medical care ceases to be a therapeutic relationship. It becomes another tool of surveillance and coercion.
A plantation doctor was basically an agent of the very system that kept you in chains.
Precisely. Distrust of white doctors wasn't just paranoia or ignorance. It was a highly rational survival mechanism.
I was trying to find an analogy for this dynamic to really make it click. It's like being forced to trust a mechanic who actively profits from breaking your car.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. The mechanic doesn't want your car to run perfectly so you can drive away to freedom. He just wants the engine turning over barely enough so you can keep driving in circles in his lot, generating revenue for him.
There is a fundamental, terrifying conflict of interest there.
Exactly. You can imagine the quiet dread. You're already physically broken down from forced labor, and you see the plantation doctor riding up to your cabin.
Because you know his objective isn't to stop your pain, it's to get you back to the fields by any means necessary.
So if you can't trust the doctor, and the system itself is the disease, where do you go? How do you heal?
You build a new system, you build it in the woods, you build it in the dark, and you rely entirely on your own community.
But doing that carried an immense risk, right? Because the enslavers were terrified of this hidden knowledge.
Oh, absolutely terrified. Enslavers were acutely aware that they were heavily outnumbered by a captive population that they brutalized daily.
So they were paranoid.
Beyond paranoid. They lived in chronic fear that the people preparing their food or nursing their white children might use botanical knowledge against them.
You mean poisoning?
Exactly, poisoning. Because of this fear, many southern states actually passed laws explicitly forbidding enslaved people from acquiring or sharing herbal knowledge.
Wait, simply knowing which roots and berries did what was criminalized.
Yes. It was a capital offense in many places.
So it's this incredibly dangerous cat and mouse game. If you're an enslaved healer, you hold the knowledge that can save your neighbor from dying of malaria.
But if the overseer catches you boiling a specific root, you could be accused of plotting an assassination and executed.
That is an unbelievable burden to carry. And the irony, as several of these authors point out, is that white colonial communities actually desperately needed this medical knowledge.
Yeah, European colonizers were in a completely foreign ecosystem. Their traditional European herbs didn't grow in Virginia or Louisiana.
So they criminalized the herbal knowledge of enslaved Africans, yet simultaneously relied on it when their own heroic medicine failed.
It's the ultimate hypocrisy.
So, because the institutional system was a threat, these alternative care networks had to be built from within. Which brings us to the individuals who held this vital knowledge.
The community healers, the architects of survival.
Right. The deep dive introduces the slave folk practitioners. We're talking about the grannies, the midwives, the root doctors, and the secret doctors.
And much of what we know about these specific individuals comes from a massive historical undertaking known as the WPA narratives.
The Works Progress Administration, right, during the Great Depression.
Exactly. In the late 1930s, they sent field writers across the country to interview elderly African Americans who had been born into slavery. They collected thousands of oral accounts.
But okay, let's unpack this. We have to look closely at the methodology of the WPA narratives because it really frames everything we know about these healers.
That's a great point. The interviewers were predominantly white, operating in the Jim Crow South, interviewing black men and women in their 80s and 90s.
The power dynamic there is just massive.
Huge. You have an elderly black person sitting across from a white government worker in 1937 in a society still actively terrorizing black communities.
They are definitely not going to reveal their most powerful, guarded secrets.
Precisely why historians have to read between the lines today. Often, the cures in the WPA narratives are presented simply as lists of weird ingredients.
Because they lack the deep cultural context, right?
Right, and subsequent white historians sometimes read those lists and dismiss these practices as primitive or just silly superstitions.
It's like reading a complex culinary recipe without understanding the chef or the culture or even the kitchen.
That's exactly it.
If I hand you a piece of paper that just says, rub a spider web on a cut, without any explanation, you're going to think I'm out of my mind.
And the danger of stripping context from these survival tactics is that it historically reinforced racist tropes of enslaved people as ignorant.
It completely misses the genius.
It misses the underlying philosophy of these community healers, which was profoundly different from Western medicine. They treated the whole being.
Break that down for me. How does treating the whole being differ from what a white doctor was doing?
Well, a 19th century Western doctor was highly compartmentalized. They looked at a symptom, say, a persistent cough, and tried to suppress the cough with an aggressive physical intervention.
Like mercury pills.
Right. But African American folk healing recognized that a person is not merely a mechanical collection of organs. If the physical, the spiritual, or the social relationships of a person were in conflict, the body would manifest that imbalance as an illness.
So you couldn't just hand someone an herb and walk away.
No, not at all. The healer had to act as a physician, a spiritual leader, and a psychologist simultaneously.
Oh.
To heal a physical fever, they might also need to heal a rift within the community, or provide a spiritual cleansing to address the profound trauma of enslavement.
They understood the psychosomatic connection centuries before modern Western medicine even had a vocabulary for it.
Exactly. And think about the crushing burden these healers carried. They are enslaved themselves. They endure the same grueling labor in the fields, the same starvation diets.
Yet they take on the exhaustive responsibility of keeping everyone else alive, all while hiding their knowledge.
There is an incredible narrative from an ex-slave named Janie Landrum out of Texas that illustrates the divide between these two medical systems perfectly.
Oh, I remember this one. She recalled that if a slave got a broken arm, the master immediately called for the white doctor.
Because a broken bone is a structural threat to the property. The enslaver needs the machinery repaired so the labor can continue. Setting a bone is mechanical.
Exactly. But Janie Landrum noted that for internal illnesses, like chills, fevers, malaria, the white doctor was useless.
For those sicknesses, the enslaved community completely trusted their old Negro mammy.
Right. She would go into the woods, gather specific herbs, and make teas. The community knew intrinsically that she was a better doctor than the white man with his toxic pills.
Because the patient has to fundamentally trust that the healer actually wants them to survive for their own sake, not just to return to the cotton field.
That trust is a critical component of the healing process.
It's everything.
So if you can't trust the doctor, and you have no access to pharmacies, where do you physically go to find medicine?
You have to look down at the dirt beneath your feet. You look to the woods.
And the botanical ingenuity detailed in these sources is just mind-blowing. Enslaved people brought a deeply sophisticated botanical framework from West and Central Africa.
But obviously the ecosystem in Virginia or South Carolina is completely different from the ecosystem in Angola or Senegal. They couldn't find their traditional plants.
Right, so this is a profound example of adaptation. They arrived with a methodology for understanding plants, but they had to learn a completely new biological language.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, they didn't do this in a vacuum. This is where we see cultural hybridity. There was a vital exchange of knowledge with Native Americans.
The sources explicitly highlight this, right? The WPA interviewees frequently talk about Indian grandmothers or learning to use Indian plants.
Yeah, they learned to harvest white sassafras root and poke roots from the indigenous populations who had been managing that land for thousands of years.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Imagine dropping an expert botanist onto an alien planet. They look around and don't recognize a single leaf.
Right.
But they know exactly how to test them. They know how to categorize a plant by its bitterness, by its smell, by observing which animals avoid it and which consume it.
And crucially, they collaborate with the locals to cross-reference their findings.
It's a brilliant trial and error process. And the whisper networks required to safely test and verify these New World plants must have been extraordinarily complex.
Oh, absolutely. They couldn't write down their findings in a medical journal.
No, if a root doctor in one county figured out that a specific preparation of red oak bark cured a fever, that information had to be transmitted orally.
Hidden in work songs or stories, and passed across plantations without the white overseers noticing.
Let's talk about the specific chemistry of what they were doing, because it proves this wasn't just random guessing. The WPA narratives mention them using red oak bark to treat severe fevers. Why red oak bark?
Well, red oak bark contains high levels of tannins and quercetin.
Okay, what do those do?
Tannins are powerful astringents. They shrink and tighten tissues, which can reduce inflammation. And quercetin is a flavonoid that has documented antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties.
So when they boiled the inner bark to make a strong tea,
They were extracting compounds that genuinely lowered body temperature and fought infection. It was real, effective pharmacology.
wow, what about severe respiratory infections? Because a bad cold in a drafty, uninsulated slave cabin during winter was often a death sentence.
The sources detail a specific protocol for this. The healer would brew a strong, hot tea made from pine straw and mullein leaves.
Okay, the patient drinks the tea, then what?
Then the healer takes tallow, which is rendered animal fat, mixes it with snuff tobacco, and heavily greases the bottom of the patient's feet, under their arms and behind their ears.
Okay, I have to be honest, a modern observer might scoff at rubbing tobacco fat on someone's feet for a cough.
They might, but look at the pharmacology and thermodynamics at play here. Pine needles are incredibly high in vitamin C, much higher than oranges, which supports the immune system.
And the mullein leaf.
Mullein leaf contains riboscoside, a compound shown to have soothing, anti-inflammatory properties for the respiratory tract. It acts as an expectorant to clear the lungs.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the greasing? Why the fat in tobacco?
The tallow acts as a thermal barrier. If you are sleeping on a dirt floor in a cabin with gaps in the walls, retaining body heat is literally a matter of life and death. The grease seals the heat in.
Oh, wow. And the snuff?
The snuff contains nicotine. When applied to pulse points like under the arms, behind the ears, the soles of the feet, the nicotine absorbs transdermally.
So it acts as a mild stimulant.
Exactly. It slightly raises the heart rate, which makes the patient feel warmer and keeps blood circulating. It is a highly pragmatic, multi-layered treatment utilizing exactly what was available.
It's just phenomenal. But wait, what happens when the ailment isn't something you can fix with a leaf?
Right. When you are systematically stripped of all resources, you are forced to use whatever random items are lying around the yard or the tool shed.
The sources talk extensively about non-herbal remedies. And this is where I really need you to break things down for me.
This is the area of historical medicine most frequently dismissed as pure superstition.
Right, because the WPA narratives list things like using cobwebs mixed with turpentine to stop a wound from bleeding. Medically speaking, how does rubbing dusty spiderwebs into an open cut make any sense? Sounds like a fast track to a horrific infection.
It sounds totally counterintuitive to a modern ear accustomed to sterile gauze, sure, but we must evaluate it based on the biochemistry of the materials.
Okay, what's in a spiderweb?
Spiderwebs are actually rich in vitamin K, which is essential for blood clotting. They also contain a high concentration of fibrin, a protein involved in the clotting of blood.
Wait, really?
Yeah. For centuries across various cultures, spiderwebs were used as a natural hemostatic agent to stop bleeding.
Okay, but what about the dirt and bacteria in the web?
That is where the turpentine comes in. Turpentine in the 19th century wasn't the synthetic paint thinner we buy at the hardware store today.
What was it?
It was a natural resin distilled directly from pine trees. And pine resin contains terpenes, which are highly effective natural antimicrobials and antiseptics.
Wow. So by mixing the cobweb with the pine resin.
You are creating a functional, improvised wound dressing that simultaneously clots the blood and disinfects the laceration.
Okay, my mind is blown. I stand entirely corrected on the cobwebs.
It's brilliant pragmatism.
But what about the remedies that clearly don't have a chemical component? Like one of the most famous folk cures mentioned in Mitchum's work is tying a silver dime around the ankle to cure severe muscle cramps.
Or wearing a copper penny on a string around the neck for indigestion.
Right. Silver does not absorb through the skin to relax a muscle. There's no pharmacological mechanism there.
You are absolutely right that the chemical property of the silver is not what is relaxing the calf muscle. To understand this, we have to look at psychoneuroimmunology.
Psychoneuroimmunology, that's a mouthful. What is that?
It's the study of how psychological states influence the nervous and immune systems. Consider the physiological state of an enslaved person. They are existing in a state of chronic, unremitting trauma.
Their bodies are flooded with cortisol and adrenaline.
Exactly. They're in permanent fight-or-flight mode.
And chronic stress causes extreme muscle tension, high blood pressure, and severe cramping.
Precisely. Now, if an elder in your community, someone who holds deep spiritual and social authority, ties a silver dime around your ankle and tells you with absolute conviction that this talisman will protect you from cramps and ward off malevolent forces, what happens in your brain?
I mean, you feel protected, you feel safe.
Yes. Your anxiety immediately decreases, your hypervigilance drops. Because you believe you are shielded, your parasympathetic nervous system engages.
Oh, I see. So your cortisol levels fall.
And your body physically relaxes, which immediately stops the cramping. The psychological comfort of the talisman alters the physical health outcome.
So the communal belief itself is the active ingredient.
Exactly. It's an early, brilliant form of holistic management.
That makes perfect sense. The sources highlight several more intense examples of this, like one remedy for a sprained ankle involved crushing a dirt dauber's nest, the mud tubes built by wasps, mixing the clay with vinegar and binding it to the sprain.
Or placing a heavy iron axe in the bed next to a patient to cut hard pains.
Right. And for a severe toothache, a healer might take 9 iron nails, soak them in vinegar, and drive them deep into the dirt floor of the cabin to nail down the throbbing pain.
These are classic examples of sympathetic magic, a concept found in indigenous cultures globally.
How does sympathetic magic work?
The underlying logic is that an action performed on a symbolic object can produce a corresponding effect on the physical body. The axe is designed to cleave hardwood, so symbolically it can cleave a hard pain.
And a nail pins things to the earth, so it can pin down the shooting pain of an infected tooth.
Exactly.
Hold on, I'm struggling with this a bit. I understand the psychological comfort of a silver dime, but if I have an abscessed tooth, driving a nail into the ground isn't going to fix the infection.
No, it won't cure the infection. But think about pain management. Pain is not just a physical signal. It is an emotional experience processed by the brain.
Right.
If you are lying in agony and a deeply respected healer performs an intense, rhythmic, highly intentional ritual of driving 9 nails into the earth, telling you that with each strike, the pain is being driven away from you, your brain reacts to that powerful narrative.
Because you believe the axe cuts the pain, your brain releases endorphins.
Exactly. Endorphins are the body's natural opiates. The brain can release massive amounts of them simply based on strong suggestion and belief. It's incredibly effective when pharmaceutical painkillers simply do not exist.
It makes me wonder if we still rely on sympathetic magic in modern medicine today, just dressed up differently.
Oh, we absolutely do. Think about the white coat worn by a physician.
Oh, true.
It is a modern talisman. The moment a doctor in a crisp white coat walks into an examination room, a patient's blood pressure often drops simply because they are in the presence of perceived medical authority.
Wow. We use machines that beep and hum with authoritative lights to provide a sense of technological magic.
And we use aggressive language. We battle cancer. We target viruses. The delivery mechanism has evolved, but the reliance on narrative, authority, and belief remains a massive component of healing.
That is profound. And this reliance on belief, on the power of narrative to alter physical reality, naturally brings us to the ultimate tool of survival discussed in these texts, the spiritual realm.
This is where physical healing crosses the boundary into hoodoo, conjure, and active hidden resistance.
The spiritual practices of enslaved people are perhaps the most heavily misunderstood and sensationalized aspect of African American folk healing, wouldn't you say?
Oh, without a doubt. Pop culture treats hoodoo as spooky magic, but in reality, we are talking about the spiritual realm functioning as a highly practical tool for endurance and defense.
We leaned heavily on Starcase's The Conjure Workbook for this. What is so striking is how enslaved people masked their indigenous spiritual systems directly within the religion of their oppressors.
It's a masterclass in subversion.
The enslavers forced Christianity upon the enslaved population to enforce obedience, right? They specifically preached from the epistles, focusing on verses that commanded servants to obey their masters.
But the enslaved community took the Bible and entirely repurposed it. They recognized the inherent power in the text, but they read it through an African cosmological lens.
The Bible essentially became a book of spells. It became the core textbook of conjure work.
It's like prison inmates taking the metal bed frames the wardens gave them to sleep on and quietly filing them down into lockpicks in the dark.
That's a perfect analogy. They took the exact instrument of their confinement and turned it into a tool for spiritual escape and armor. And no figure in the Bible was more revered in this context than Moses.
Right, because they didn't view Moses just as a pious religious leader. They viewed Moses as the ultimate two-headed conjure worker.
Wait, what does two-headed mean in this context?
A two-headed worker in hoodoo tradition refers to someone who possesses dual vision. They have both natural, practical knowledge of roots and herbs and supernatural insight into the spirit world.
Ah, I see. So Moses walked into the court of Pharaoh, the most powerful enslaver on earth, and he didn't just offer a polite prayer. He used a physical object, a stick, his staff, to bring tangible plagues.
Exactly. He turned water to blood, he summoned swarms of locusts, he physically defeated the oppressors with magic.
God anointed Moses with power, and Moses used his conjure stick to shield his people and destroy his enemies.
That represents a genius subversion of theology. The enslavers thought they were erasing African identity by handing out Bibles, but enslaved Africans hollowed out the theology of the oppressor and filled it with their own indigenous power structures.
The texts detail specific practices, like setting up ancestor altars. but they had to be incredibly careful to mask what they were doing.
Yeah, they would orient their altars to the east, toward the rising sun, which is a common practice in many African traditions.
And they avoided using salt on the altar because salt was believed to keep spirits away.
And they didn't just pray to a nebulous god. They invoked specific biblical prophets as functional tools to combat the brutality of the enslaver.
Like who?
Well, if you needed to reverse a curse, or if the overseer was targeting you, you called upon Elijah, the prophet who called down fire from the sky.
Right.
If you were facing an insurmountable obstacle, you invoked Joshua, who blew down the massive walls of Jericho. These figures were weaponized for daily survival.
I think about the psychological armor this must have provided. Imagine the terror of living under an overseer who legally has the power to end your life on a whim.
It's unbearable to even think about.
But inside your own mind, and within your secret community gatherings, you genuinely believe you have direct access to the destructive power of Moses.
It changes everything.
When the enslaved community sang spirituals out in the fields, songs like Go Down Moses, they weren't just singing a pleasant Sunday school hymn to pass the time.
Absolutely not. It was a coded invocation. To the white overseer listening from horseback, it sounded like obedient Christian worship.
But to the enslaved people singing it, it was a collective, rhythmic prayer for supernatural vengeance and liberation.
It was an invocation for a powerful conjure doctor to strike down the white man's chains. The psychological fortification of knowing you possess a higher, more potent spiritual power than the man holding the whip is incalculable.
It kept the mind intact when the flesh was being destroyed.
Beautifully put.
And the practical applications of this in the Conjure Workbook are incredibly specific. For instance, the use of psalms. You don't just quietly read Psalm 23.
Right, you recite Psalm 23 over olive oil to consecrate it, and then anoint your forehead to reveal hidden dangers in your life.
And if an enslaver was actively threatening a member of the community, there was a ritual to block them.
Oh, the crossroads dirt ritual.
Yes, a root worker would gather dirt from a crossroads, which in African cosmology is the powerful intersection between the physical and spiritual worlds, mix it with sulfur and crushed red pepper, and place it in a hidden box to legally or physically bind the enemy's actions.
It is the perfect synthesis of sympathetic magic and biblical authority. The sulfur and red pepper are physically irritating, volatile substances used to agitate and repel the spirit of the oppressor.
Well, the crossroads dirt anchors the work. But how does all of this spiritual defiance directly contribute to physical endurance? If I have tuberculosis, praying to Joshua doesn't clear my lungs.
That's a fair question. But you have to remember that despair is a biologically lethal disease.
How so?
If you accept the narrative of the enslaver, if you internalize the idea that you are subhuman, that you are merely property, and that God himself wants you to be a slave, your spirit breaks.
And when the spirit breaks, the body rapidly follows.
Exactly. Severe depression and total hopelessness completely crash the human immune system.
So by maintaining a practice of spiritual defiance,
Whether that is carrying a secret root in your pocket or whispering an invocation to Elijah while picking cotton, you are generating hope. You are asserting a narrative of current agency and eventual justice.
and hope reduces the physiological burden of stress, allowing the immune system to function.
It is a biological necessity for physical endurance.
That is an incredible insight. And it brings us to the final part of our deep dive today. This incredible fusion of botanical science, pragmatic psychology, and spiritual resistance did not magically disappear with emancipation.
No, it survived, it evolved, and it remains deeply relevant to you today.
Stephanie Mitchum's research outlines exactly why African-American folk healing continues into the modern era. She provides 8 distinct reasons, and they are critical to understanding modern healthcare disparities.
Let's list a few of those because they're vital. She mentions social marginalization, cultural hybridity, structural racism within institutional medicine,
As well as ongoing adaptation, community commerce, sheer pragmatism, the proven efficacy of the treatments, and a holistic approach that treats the entire person.
Right. Today's secret doctors, the root workers, the community herbalists, they still operate largely because the systemic failures that necessitated them in the 1850s haven't entirely vanished.
We still have a modern medical system where studies repeatedly show that Black patients' pain is undertreated or routinely dismissed by doctors compared to white patients.
And we still have massive economic barriers, medical redlining, and a healthcare system tied to employment that leaves millions marginalized.
This raises an important question about self-determination, doesn't it?
It does. By taking control of their health in the 19th century, by foraging in the woods, brewing their own teas, and creating their own spiritual armor-enslaved people, were radically asserting their humanity.
And today, when institutional medicine still economically segregates communities or fails to listen to the lived experiences of marginalized people, folk healing remains a powerful boundary of self-care.
It is a profound way of saying, if the institutional system will not see me or will not heal me, I will heal myself using the wisdom of my ancestors.
You can see how modern social activist work, particularly movements centered around community wellness, flows directly from these historical concepts.
Absolutely. The idea that I am not well unless my neighbor is well and our community is safe, that holistic view of health is a direct descendant of the plantation care networks.
The sources mention the concept of getaway money, the idea of having a hidden financial stash to survive an emergency. Folk medicine acts as a similar safety net.
It's a mechanism for thriving, not just surviving, in the face of systemic neglect.
So what does this all mean? We look at this direct line from the WPA narratives, from Janie Landrum trusting the old mama's boiling peach tree leaves over the white doctor, to modern holistic health movements.
It means modern science is finally starting to validate what these community healers knew inherently.
That's exactly it. Institutional medicine is only just now catching up to the idea that the mind, the spirit, and the body are chemically undeniably linked.
We have all these cutting-edge studies on the microbiome, on how trauma alters DNA expression, on the physical impacts of chronic stress.
But these enslaved healers knew this centuries ago. They didn't have electron microscopes, but they possessed a profound observational science that told them, you cannot cure the flesh if the spirit is broken or the community is fractured.
They understood the human ecosystem perfectly, whereas Western medicine spent 2 centuries trying to dissect it into isolated parts.
Okay, let's step back and look at the ground we've covered today. We started by examining the dangerous, often lethal reality of plantation doctors and the terrifying conflict of interest inherent in heroic slave medicine.
We met the grannies, midwives, and root doctors who risked their lives to build a shadow system of care.
We walked through the earth pharmacy, unpacking the pharmacology of red oak bark and mullein, and how African botanical frameworks merged with Native American knowledge.
We questioned the pragmatism of cobwebs and dimes, discovering the brilliant science and psychology behind sympathetic magic.
And we explored how the oppressed took the religion forced upon them, filed it down like a lockpick, and used it to invoke powerful figures like Moses to build impenetrable spiritual armor.
It stands as a testament to the absolute indomitability of the human spirit. When faced with a system designed to strip away every ounce of humanity, they forged an intricate network of care and survival.
I want you to think about something tonight or maybe tomorrow morning when you're getting ready for the day. Go into your bathroom and open your modern medicine cabinet.
Look at the neatly printed labels, the sterile plastic bottles, the highly categorized pills for every specific ache.
And ask yourself, how much of our current evolving understanding of wellness, of holistic care, and of the profound mind-body connection was paid for by the sheer will of enslaved people experimenting in the darkest, most brutal of circumstances?
Consider how our modern sterile healthcare system still deeply struggles to treat the whole being. We are so quick to isolate symptoms, but we forget the spirit entirely.
Perhaps we all have something profound to learn from the seeker doctors of the past about what it truly means, not just to fix a symptom, but to heal a human being.
It completely reframes how we view the history of medicine in America.
Thank you for taking this journey with us today. Keep exploring, keep reading, and always question the history of the knowledge we take for granted. We will see you next time on The Deep Dive.